Lena Hart had not planned on hiding in a stranger's hotel room in 4-inch heels with mascara drying under her eyes and rage still hot in her throat, but the Halcyon Grand was large enough to swallow mistakes, and tonight it had already swallowed 3. The first had been agreeing to attend her company's winter acquisition gala when she knew her ex would be there. The second had been believing Mason Cole when he texted that he only wanted to apologize. The third had been stopping long enough to let him corner her outside the ballroom with that same smooth voice, that same expensive suit, and the same talent for making bad behavior sound reasonable. By the time she slipped away from him, pulse hammering, she wanted 5 minutes alone, a locked door, and silence. Her best friend Ava had texted her room number earlier, telling her to escape upstairs if the gala got unbearable. Lena remembered the floor, remembered the suite number, remembered none of it clearly enough to notice she had entered 1908 instead of 1808 until it was too late. The room was dark except for city lights spilling through the windows in silver bands. She kicked off her shoes, leaned back against the door, and let out a breath that shook on the way down. Below her, the skyline of Manhattan glittered through the glass like another world entirely, clean and cold and impossible to touch. The suite smelled faintly of cedar, bergamot, and the kind of money that came wrapped in discretion. It was larger than Ava's would have been, but Lena's brain was too fried to care. She crossed the living room, dropped onto the edge of the sofa, and pressed the heel of her hand to her chest until her heartbeat slowed from panic to fury. Mason had the same methods he always had: corner, charm, pressure, revise history, speak softly while he tried to move her exactly where he wanted her. 6 months after their engagement ended, he still talked as if her boundaries were temporary misunderstandings. He had reached for her wrist downstairs. She had looked at his hand and remembered every elegant apology that had once convinced her to stay. That was the part that still humiliated her. Not that he lied. That she had once loved the way he did it. A bottle of water stood on the credenza beside a bowl of pears polished to a shine no fruit deserved. Lena drank half the bottle in 4 desperate pulls, then stood and walked to the bedroom, intending only to sit down for a minute and text Ava that she had made it upstairs alive. The bed looked untouched, the lamps off, the curtains half open to the glittering city. She dropped her phone on the blanket, sat, then leaned back for just a second. Her body chose that exact moment to remember she had been up since dawn, had worked 10 straight hours before the gala, and had spent the last 30 minutes outrunning a past she was still angrier about than she liked admitting. She did not mean to fall asleep. She barely remembered pulling the decorative throw over herself. The next thing she knew, dawn was pressing pale gold against closed eyelids and a deep, even breath sounded somewhere beside her. Lena opened her eyes slowly, then all at once. She was in a king-sized bed she did not recognize, wearing yesterday's black silk dress wrinkled past salvation, one arm trapped beneath the warm weight of a white duvet. Beside her, stretched on his back in a charcoal t-shirt with one forearm flung across the blanket, was Adrian Wolfe, CEO of Wolfe Meridian Hotels. Her boss. The man half the company referred to, with a mixture of awe and terror, as the reason deadlines existed. He was more striking asleep than awake, which felt deeply unfair. Awake, Adrian's face was all precision, hard mouth, straight nose, cheekbones sharp enough to slice open a meeting. Asleep, the severity softened just enough to be dangerous. Dark hair fell across his forehead. His jaw was shadowed. One hand rested palm up on the sheet between them, relaxed in a way Lena had never seen during office hours. For one long, suspended second, her mind refused to process what her eyes were seeing. Then it did. She was in the wrong room. In the wrong bed. Next to the wrong man. A soft sound escaped her before she could stop it. Adrian's eyes opened instantly. No confusion. No disorientation. Just a calm, terrifying awareness that locked onto her face and held. "Good morning, Miss Hart," he said, voice rough with sleep and somehow still formal enough to make her want to vanish through the mattress. Lena pushed herself upright so fast the duvet twisted around her knees. "I can explain." One dark brow lifted. I'm counting on it. She dragged in a breath. This is going to sound bad. It already looks worse than bad. His gaze flicked once over the room, then back to her, unreadable. Start wherever you like. She stared at him, mortified. He stared back, composed enough for both of them. And somewhere between the sunlight, the silence, and the memory of Mason's hand on her wrist the night before, Lena had the absurd, devastating thought that waking up beside Adrian Wolfe might become the least manageable moment of her entire life. By the time Lena finished explaining, she wanted a new name, a new city, and possibly a discreet tunnel beneath the Halcyon Grand that would allow junior executives to disappear without consequence. Adrian listened without interrupting, one ankle crossed over the opposite knee now, his expression so still it could have passed for indifference if she had not worked under him for nearly 2 years. She had learned early that his stillness meant attention, not absence. It meant he was filing away every detail, weighing motive against fact, and deciding whether mercy would be useful. You entered the wrong suite because your friend texted you a room number, he said when she finally stopped. You intended to hide for a few minutes. You fell asleep fully dressed. I came in after midnight, found you unconscious on top of the bed, and chose not to wake you. Lena closed her eyes briefly. When you summarize it, it somehow sounds less insane. I wouldn't go that far. She looked down at her wrinkled dress. You could fire me. For being exhausted, he asked. For trespassing in your suite. If I dismissed every employee who wandered into the wrong room during a company event, I'd have no events left. His tone was dry, but not cruel. That almost made it worse. Lena swung her legs over the side of the bed. I'm still sorry. You said that already. Then I'm saying it again for emphasis. Adrian stood, and the room altered around him the way it always did when he moved. He was tall enough to make the furniture seem incidental, broad-shouldered without advertising it, the kind of man who never raised his voice because space shifted for him anyway. He crossed to the table near the windows where a silver coffee service had been set up, poured a cup, then another, and handed one to her without comment. Lena accepted it on instinct. Thank you, she said, because apparently humiliation had not yet destroyed all of her manners. You're welcome. He waited until she had taken a sip before speaking again. Will Mason Cole be a problem? Her fingers tightened around the porcelain. No, Adrian's eyes rested on her a second too long. That wasn't a rhetorical question. Lena stared into the coffee. The steam curled against her face. She could lie. He would know. She could tell the truth, and then she would have to admit that Mason had never really accepted the end of their engagement, only the pause before what he clearly assumed would be her return. He's inconvenient, she said carefully. Persistent. Embarrassingly committed to the idea that he can negotiate human beings like contracts. That sounds tiresome. It is. Adrian set his cup down. Did he touch you? The question landed without softness, which was exactly why it felt protective. Lena looked up. He grabbed my wrist. His jaw shifted once. Did you ask security to intervene? I handled it. That is not what I asked. No, she said, hearing the defensiveness in her own voice. I didn't ask security. He gave a single, unreadable nod, as if confirming something he had suspected. Next time, do. Lena almost laughed. You say that like there's going to be a next time. Mr. Cole was invited by Davenport Capital, Adrian said. Our negotiations with them continue through the weekend. So yes. There will almost certainly be a next time. She stood too quickly, coffee sloshing near the rim. Perfect. Excellent. Love that for me. Something close to amusement touched his mouth and vanished so quickly she almost doubted it. Get changed, he said. There's a strategy session at 9. Lena blinked. Today. The calendar did not alter itself to accommodate your night of accidental burglary. I was hoping for a little pity. I gave you coffee. A stunning display of compassion. He looked at her for a beat, then said, "You're leading the Bristol Harbor presentation this morning." Her head snapped up. "I thought Celeste Warren was taking that." "I changed my mind." "Why?" "Because you built the model, you understand the numbers, and you don't mistake polished confidence for competence." Lena should have been pleased. Instead she heard the trap first. A high-visibility presentation. Davenport Capital in the room. Mason probably there. Celeste furious. Adrian impassive as a stone monument while handing her the sort of opportunity people clawed their way up 2 floors to get. "You're promoting me or punishing me?" she asked. "I haven't decided." She finished the coffee in one reckless swallow, set the cup down, and reached for her phone. 23 unread messages waited, 11 from Ava, 4 from Celeste, 3 from her assistant, and 1 from Mason. "Morning, sweetheart. We should clear the air before your presentation." Lena deleted his message without opening the thread. Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed. "If he approaches you again," he said, "inform me." "Why?" "Because he's currently sitting across from people I intend to do business with, and I dislike variables." There it was. The Adrian Wolf version of concern, dressed as operational efficiency, ironed flat, and delivered without room for sentiment. It should not have warmed her. It did. "Right," she said. "Variables." He held her gaze. 9 o'clock, Miss Hart. "I know how clocks work." "I'm relieved to hear it." She made it to the suite door before she glanced back. He was standing by the window now, coffee in one hand, Manhattan spread behind him like an empire he had not yet decided whether to keep. He looked composed again. Entirely himself. No trace of the man whose breathing had brushed the same pillow at dawn. "Mr. Wolf," she said. He turned his head slightly. "Yes." Lena lifted the spare keycard she had found tangled in the duvet. "I think this is yours." Adrian's gaze dropped to the card and rose back to her face. "Keep it," he said. "I'd rather avoid another lockout." She stared. "You're giving me access to your suite. I'm giving you a solution to your talent for entering the wrong room." And just like that, with one impossible sentence and a look she could not decode, Adrian Wolf made walking away feel far more dangerous than staying. Lena had presented in rooms full of investors before. She had defended budget forecasts, dismantled weak assumptions, and once corrected a senior vice president's arithmetic in front of 30 shareholders without her voice wavering once. None of that prepared her for standing at the head of the Halcyon's glass-walled conference room while Mason sat halfway down the table with a smirk he had probably mistaken for charm, and Adrian Wolf watched from the far end like the concept of pressure had been invented for his private use. She did not look at either of them when she began. She looked at the screen, clicked to the first slide, and let the numbers carry her. Bristol Harbor was one of the largest waterfront redevelopment opportunities on the East Coast, a weathered port with failing occupancy, extraordinary location value, and enough structural rot to frighten anyone who loved clean spreadsheets. Lena loved difficult projects. Difficult projects did not lie, apologize, circle back, or ask for a second chance over champagne. They were broken or salvageable. Costly or profitable. Weak or strong. She could work with that. By the fourth slide, the room had stopped treating her like a substitute and started treating her like the architect of the deal. She walked them through seasonal variants, zoning concessions, renovation staging, labor exposure, and the hospitality behavior data she had spent weeks refining. When a Davenport analyst challenged her margin assumptions, she answered without hesitation. When Celeste interrupted to clarify a point Lena had already made, Lena thanked her brightly and moved on before the interruption could grow roots. When Mason tried to redirect the conversation toward partnership optics, Adrian cut him off with one sentence. "We're discussing operating fundamentals, not theatrics." The room went still. Lena kept speaking. She did not allow herself to feel the current shifting beneath the table, but she felt it anyway. Adrian was not making things easier for her. That would have been insulting. He was making it impossible for anyone else to make them harder. After the meeting ended, the investors broke into smaller groups around the coffee station. Celeste swept past Lena with a smile so elegant it almost hid the blade beneath it. "Well done," she said. "I didn't realize Adrian was in the mood for surprise promotions." "Neither did I," Lena said. Celeste's gaze flicked to the faint crease in Lena's dress and back again. "Rough night?" Lena smiled. "For some people." Celeste's expression barely changed. That was why she was dangerous. She had perfected the art of polite hostility until it looked like breeding. "Be careful," she said softly. "Visibility can be mistaken for protection." Then she moved away before Lena could answer, leaving behind perfume and a warning that sounded borrowed from a richer villain. "She does enjoy dramatics," Adrian said from beside Lena. She turned, startled enough that some of her annoyance burned off. "How long have you been there?" "Long enough to know you don't need rescuing." "Good," Lena said. "Because I don't." "No," he agreed. "You don't." The approval in his voice was quiet, almost clinical, but it slid through her with more force than praise should have. Adrian handed her a tablet. "Updated due diligence notes. We're moving the Bristol team to a private review this afternoon. You're joining." "Am I?" "You are now. You keep volunteering my time. And you keep justifying it." She took the tablet, aware of his fingers brushing hers for a fraction of a second too long to be accidental or maybe just long enough to make her imagine it. "What changed?" she asked. "Davenport wants the waterfront parcel separated from the Legacy Hotel asset." Lena frowned at the files. "That destroys the turnaround strategy." "Yes. So we're saying no." Adrian's eyes sharpened. "We're showing them why they're wrong." The rest of the day became a blur of meetings, numbers, and the kind of tactical debate Lena had always loved. She and Adrian worked side by side in a smaller conference suite overlooking the river, their voices low over market reports and legal binders while the city shifted from steel blue afternoon to amber evening beyond the glass. He was exacting, impatient with sloppy logic, uninterested in ego, and entirely ruthless with bad arguments. It should have been exhausting. Instead it felt like finally being spoken to at full speed. He challenged her assumptions, then listened when she defended them. He disagreed without condescension. He pushed. She pushed back. Hours disappeared. At 7, a server appeared with dinner. Lena looked up from a zoning file. "I didn't order food." Adrian was still reading. "I did." The trays held grilled salmon, roasted potatoes, charred broccolini, and the lemon tart from the halcyon pastry kitchen that Lena had once mentioned, offhand, in an elevator conversation 3 months earlier. She stared at it. "This is my order." Adrian signed the receipt. "You say that as if I committed a crime." "How do you know my order?" "I pay attention." It was such a simple answer that it robbed her of one. They ate at the conference table while the skyline darkened and reflected back at them like a second room. For a few rare minutes the work thinned. "Why hotels?" Adrian asked abruptly. Lena looked up from her plate. "Why did I choose hospitality acquisitions?" "Yes." She considered the question. "Because hotels are where people become different versions of themselves," she said. "Best version, worst version, bravest, loneliest, happiest, most dishonest. A hotel sees all of it and keeps everyone's secrets anyway." Adrian watched her with unsettling focus. "And you prefer secrets to homes?" "I didn't say that." "No," he said. "You didn't." She set down her fork. "Why did you?" His expression did not change, but something in it closed and opened again too quickly to name. "Because my father built one," he said. Then I learned he was better at building empires than living inside them. Lena waited, but he gave her nothing else. It should have felt like a wall. Instead it felt like a door opened exactly 1 inch. At 9:30, her phone buzzed. Mason again. We need to talk. Don't make this ugly. Adrian's gaze shifted to the screen before she could flip it over. His mouth went still. He's becoming repetitive, he said. You noticed that too? Adrian leaned back in his chair, eyes on her face now, not the phone. Lena. It was the first time he had used her first name. Just that, and her pulse betrayed her completely. Yes. Don't meet him alone. She should have answered lightly. She should have shrugged it off. Instead she nodded once, because the way Adrian said it left no room for performance, only truth, and the truth was that for the first time that weekend, she was no longer entirely certain which man was harder to escape. By Saturday afternoon, the Halcyon Grand had divided itself into 2 separate worlds. In one, investors in tailored wool and polished shoes traded numbers, forecasts, and calculated smiles beneath chandeliers designed to look effortless. In the other, the hotel became what hotels always eventually became, a theater for private panic. Assistants whispered into phones in service corridors. Spouses fought behind closed suite doors. One board member drank too much at lunch and had to be walked discreetly through a staff elevator before he embarrassed several millions of dollars. Lena moved through both worlds with a folder under one arm and enough caffeine in her bloodstream to power a small republic. She had changed into a cream blouse and slate skirt after the morning meeting, pinned her hair back, and rebuilt her face into the calm expression that let people mistake self-command for serenity. It was working on everyone except Adrian. He seemed to notice every slight shift in her breathing, every clipped answer, every time Mason's name appeared on her phone and she silenced it without opening the message. Around 4, Celeste intercepted her near the executive lounge. Adrian's looking for you, she said. He's in the West Terrace suite. Lena adjusted the files in her hand. Thank you. Celeste's smile held. Of course. Though I have to admit, it's fascinating. What is? How quickly some people become indispensable. Lena met her gaze. Competence can be very disruptive. So can ambition, Celeste said softly. Especially when it forgets where the ceiling is. Lena had spent the first year of her career pretending women like Celeste did not bother her. The second year taught her that pretending was a waste of energy. If the ceiling is low enough to be a problem, she said, it probably deserves to come down. Celeste's expression chilled by a degree. You do like playing with fire. Only when the room needs heat. She walked away before the other woman could respond and felt, rather than saw, the hostility that followed her down the hall. The West Terrace suite was empty except for Adrian's jacket on the back of a chair and an open laptop filled with contract revisions. Lena stepped inside, set her files on the table, and crossed toward the terrace doors just as they slid open. Adrian came in from outside with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled once at the forearms. The look should have been illegal in 12 states and several civilized nations. You wanted me? She asked. His gaze traveled over her as if confirming she was uninjured, which was absurd and somehow unmistakable now. I needed the revised projections. She held up the folder. Then your instincts remain excellent. He took the papers, skimmed the top page, and said, Celeste is annoyed. Celeste is always annoyed. Today she's simply accessorizing it. The corner of his mouth shifted. Did she say anything interesting? Only that ambition is dangerous. Adrian set the folder down. To mediocre people, yes. Lena laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised both of them, him only slightly. That may be the nicest thing you've ever said to me, she admitted. It wasn't nice. It was accurate. You make accuracy sound flirtatious. Do I? The room changed on those 2 words. Not dramatically. Not in some theatrical rush. Just enough for Lena to feel the air thicken. Adrian held her eyes a second longer than was safe. She became acutely aware of the open terrace doors, the late afternoon wind lifting the curtains, the city spread below them, and the fact that she had stopped breathing properly sometime in the last 5 seconds. "You're impossible," she said softly. "I've heard that before." "I'm sure you have. Usually from men older than me and less profitable." She folded her arms, partly because she needed something between her hands and his body. That may be the most Adrian Wolfe sentence ever spoken. It's a strong field. He returned to the papers, but the moment did not disappear. It settled into the room, alive and waiting. "The gala dinner starts at 8, he said after a while. "You'll be there." That sounded less like an invitation and more like a court order. "I trust clarity. And if I say no?" "You won't." She hated how correct that sounded. "Why am I going?" "Because Davenport is wavering, Mason Cole thinks proximity gives him leverage, and Celeste enjoys narratives that do not survive scrutiny." Lena frowned. "What narrative?" Adrian looked up slowly. "You haven't noticed?" She stared. He let the silence answer for him. Heat crept up her neck. "People are talking about us." "People always talk." "That is not an answer." "No," he said. "It's the problem." Her stomach dropped in a way that felt dangerously like anger. "Because I walked out of your suite this morning. Among other things." "There were no other things." Adrian's voice stayed even. "I'm aware of that." "Then why are you so calm?" "Because outrage wastes time." "Easy for you to say. You're Adrian Wolfe. If gossip follows you, it probably gets promoted." Something flashed in his expression then, gone almost at once. "And what do you think happens to you?" Lena looked away. The answer was obvious. Not promoted. Not forgiven. Women in corporate rooms never received the same generosity men granted each other in private and denied in public. Competent could become strategic. Strategic could become ambitious. Ambitious could become inappropriate with one well-placed whisper. Adrian said her name quietly. "Look at me." She did, against instinct. "You are in this room," he said, "because you earned it. You are in every room because you earned it. If anyone suggests otherwise, they answer to me." The words should have felt authoritarian. Instead they landed like structure after freefall. Lena swallowed. "That sounds suspiciously like protection." "It sounds like policy." "You don't have policies about me." "No?" he asked, and something dark and unreadable moved beneath the calm surface of his voice. Before she could speak, his phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at the screen, jaw tightening. "We're late," he said. Just like that, the room snapped back into shape. He picked up his jacket. She picked up her breathing. But when they walked toward the door together, Adrian's hand settled briefly at the small of her back to guide her through, and the touch was light enough to deny, deliberate enough to remember, and impossible to forget. The gala dinner began the way expensive evenings always did, with candlelight, excellent wine, and a room full of people pretending appetite had nothing to do with power. The Halcyon's grand ballroom had been remade for the occasion, black lacquered tables, low arrangements of winter roses, crystal so polished it caught every flicker of light and multiplied it. A string quartet played near the mirrored wall. Waiters moved like choreography. The windows along the east side of the room framed the river in dark glass and distant neon. Lena should have loved it. She loved beautiful spaces, disciplined timing, and events that ran like concealed engines beneath their elegance. Tonight all she could feel was pressure. Mason was there, of course. So was Celeste in silver satin and composure sharpened to a point. Adrian arrived 10 minutes after Lena, and the room did what rooms always did when he entered, it noticed. Not loudly. Not with vulgar obviousness. The shift was subtler than that, more expensive. Conversations adjusted. Postures straightened. Energy bent. He wore a black tuxedo as if formal wear had been designed merely to explain him. Lena hated that she noticed details under stress, the clean line of his collar, the hard economy of his movements, the fact that he never seemed overdressed or underdressed because he carried status like a weather system and clothes just adapted. She was halfway through her second conversation with a zoning consultant when Mason appeared beside her holding 2 glasses of champagne. Lena. Her smile chilled instantly. Mason. Still angry? Still finished. He handed one of the glasses to a passing server instead of taking the hint. We both know you don't mean that. That is an astonishing sentence to say to a woman in public. I'm trying to talk to you. You're trying to wear me down. His expression shifted into the patient look that once made her doubt herself and now mostly made her want to set things on fire. You're upset, he said. And this whole performance with Wolf isn't helping. The words hit clean and ugly. Lena set her own glass down before she did something useful but career-ending with it. There is no performance, she said. There is no, with Wolf. There is only you refusing to accept a complete sentence because you dislike the answer. Mason lowered his voice. You think a man like Adrian Wolf is interested in you? Rage came first. Humiliation followed a split second later, not because she believed him but because he knew exactly where to put the blade. I think a man like Adrian Wolf, Lena said evenly, understands the word no. Mason laughed softly. You always did confuse distance with respect. And you always confused possession with love. The air between them crackled. Around them the room went on glittering, unaware or pretending to be. You're making a mistake, he said. No, Lena replied. I made one. I wore a ring for 14 months and called it a future. She turned to leave. Mason caught her arm. Not hard. Not enough to draw attention. Enough. Don't, he said. That was all. One word. Same tone he had used 100 times when he wanted obedience disguised as intimacy. Lena looked at his hand on her bare skin and felt something inside her go still. Take your hand off me. Mason did not move. Adrian's voice arrived before his body did. Mr. Cole. Mason released her instantly. Adrian stepped into the space beside Lena with such measured control it was somehow more threatening than fury. You appear confused about several things, he said. Allow me to simplify them. This event is mine. Ms. Hart is my employee. And your hand belongs to yourself. Mason's smile came back, thinner now. I was speaking to my fiancé. Former fiancé, Lena said, without taking her eyes off him. Adrian's gaze never left Mason's face. More importantly, he said, a woman who asked you to stop. Several nearby conversations had gone suspiciously quiet. Celeste stood across the room pretending not to watch. Good, Lena thought wildly. Let her watch. Let all of them watch. Mason adjusted his cuff. I didn't realize you'd made yourself her spokesman. Adrian's expression did not alter. You are under several misunderstandings tonight. Mason's eyes flicked between them, recalculating. Interesting. Not particularly, Adrian said. You will leave now. Or what? The silence that followed was almost elegant. Adrian did not raise his voice. Or the security director standing behind you will escort you out, and Davenport Capital will spend the remainder of this weekend wondering why one of its partners required physical removal from a private event. Mason went pale by degrees. When he finally turned, the security director really was there. Lena had not seen him approach. Of course Adrian had. Mason looked back once, fury stripped raw now that the audience no longer favored him. This isn't over, he said. Lena held his gaze and answered with the calm she wished she had possessed years ago. It was over when I left. Security led him away. Conversation rose again in uncertain ripples, the ballroom pretending recovery. Lena became aware of her pulse hammering in her throat. Adrian looked down at her. "Are you all right?" She almost laughed at the question. Not remotely. His eyes moved over her face, checking for damage he already knew was not visible. "Come with me." Adrian, now, Lena. The way he said her name eliminated argument. He guided her through the side doors into a darkened corridor lined with gilt mirrors and low amber lamps. The noise of the ballroom softened behind them. For several seconds they said nothing. Then Lena stopped walking. "You cannot do that," she said. Adrian turned. "Remove a man who put his hands on my employee at a private event? No. Protect me like that in front of everyone?" His jaw tightened. "He grabbed you. I know what he did. Then I fail to see the ambiguity." "The ambiguity," Lena snapped, "is that now the entire ballroom thinks I need Adrian Wolfe to fight my battles." Something dangerous sparked in his eyes. "And what do you think I was doing?" "Claiming territory." The words hung between them, reckless and true enough to hurt. Adrian went very still. When he answered, his voice was low. "If I had wanted to claim territory, Lena, there would have been no room for doubt." The corridor seemed to narrow around them after that. Lena had heard Adrian deliver ultimatums to investors, cut through boardroom nonsense with surgical indifference, and dismantle bad ideas before breakfast. She had never heard him sound like this. Quiet. Precise. Controlled only by force. Her anger flickered under the weight of something more complicated and much more dangerous. "That is not helping," she said, though the softness in her voice weakened the effect. Adrian's gaze dropped briefly to her mouth, then returned to her eyes. "No," he said. "It probably isn't." They stood in silence while muted music pulsed through the ballroom doors behind them. Somewhere deeper in the hotel a service cart rattled over tile. Someone laughed too loudly at the end of the hall. The world continued, vulgar in its indifference, while everything inside Lena sharpened to a painful point. "I didn't need you to save me," she said finally. "I know. Then why did you step in?" He looked at her as if the answer should have been obvious. "Because I wanted to." That was worse. Somehow far worse. Lena folded her arms across herself, suddenly cold beneath the silk of her gown. "You can't just decide things for me because you want to." "No," Adrian agreed. "But I can decide what happens in my hotel, at my event, when a man ignores a woman saying no." She opened her mouth, shut it, and hated that logic had always sounded better in his voice. He watched the fight move through her and said more quietly, "This isn't about your competence." "It never was." "Then what is it about?" Adrian exhaled once, as if patience had become a physical burden. "You want honesty?" That would be novel. His eyes darkened, but he took the hit. "Fine. I have spent 2 days pretending I am unaffected by the fact that you fell asleep in my bed and woke up looking at me as if I was a problem you were trying not to solve. I have spent those same 2 days watching a man who lost the right to your attention behave as if it can still be demanded. So if you're asking why I intervened, the answer is this: because the thought of him touching you again made restraint feel inefficient." Lena's heartbeat stuttered into chaos. It would have been easier if he had touched her then. Easier if the moment had turned physical and reckless and obvious. Instead Adrian simply stood there, hands at his sides, giving her the full impact of his control and the dangerous edge beneath it. It was intimacy of a different order. "That," she said, voice barely steady, "is an outrageous thing to say to your employee." "I'm aware. You don't sound sorry." "I'm not." She laughed once, disbelieving, because if she did not laugh she might step toward him and worsen both their lives. "You are impossible. You've said that. I mean it more now." He took one step closer. "Not enough to crowd. Enough to change the oxygen." Then let me be clear, he said. I am not interested in owning your choices. I am interested in making sure they remain yours. That should not have undone her. It did. The worst part was that she believed him. Not because Adrian was kind. He was not, in any casual sense of the word. He was difficult, exacting, relentless, and often colder than decency required. But his respect, once given, was made of iron. Lena had been fighting to be taken seriously in rooms like his for so long that genuine regard felt almost intimate by itself. You make everything sound like a contract, she said softly. Occupational hazard. And if I don't want to be protected? Then I'll trust your judgment and dislike it in private. Her breath caught on an unwilling smile. He noticed that too. Of course he did. There it is, Adrian murmured. What? The moment you stop looking like you want to throw a glass at me. Don't be smug. It's unattractive. That's unfortunate. I had planned to build a brand on it. Lena looked away, which was a mistake. It gave her eyes nowhere safe to land except the line of his throat, the loosened tie, the dark shape of him against amber light. We should go back, she said. Probably. Neither of them moved. Adrian lifted one hand, slow enough to let her stop him, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was almost absurdly gentle. It wrecked her more efficiently than anything else that evening. Lena. Just her name. A warning. A question. A confession stripped to one word. She answered by closing the distance. The kiss began with all the restraint they had spent days weaponizing against each other. Controlled. Careful. Too careful. Then Adrian's hand curved at the back of her neck, hers caught in the lapel of his tuxedo, and the restraint shattered with a force that made the quiet corridor feel suddenly too small. He kissed like he argued, precise until precision became impossible, then devastating. Lena felt the whole weekend rearrange itself around that single impossible fact. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing harder than the room justified, Adrian rested his forehead lightly against hers. This, he said, voice rough now, is exactly why I kept my distance. Lena swallowed. You were doing a terrible job. Something like laughter moved through him, brief and astonished. Then his phone vibrated. He cursed under his breath, stepped back, and checked the screen. The change in his expression was immediate. Hard. Focused. What? Lena asked. He looked up. There's been a leak. Cold replaced heat so quickly it made her dizzy. A leak of what? Adrian's jaw tightened. Photos from this morning. You leaving my suite. For one split second the world narrowed to a white, soundless point. Then it rushed back in all at once, Celeste's smile, Mason's spite, the ballroom full of watching eyes, the endless appetite of corporate gossip when it found a woman to feed on. Who has them? She asked. Too many people already. Adrian's gaze locked on hers. And unless I move quickly, by midnight the board will. What followed moved with the speed of crisis and the cruelty of reputation. Within 20 minutes Lena was upstairs in a private boardroom with hotel security, general counsel, Adrian, and a communications director whose face suggested she considered disaster an exhausting hobby other people enjoyed. The photo itself was simple and brutal in the way simple things often were. Lena, barefoot, hair loose, black dress wrinkled from sleep, stepping out of Adrian's suite at 8:12 in the morning while he stood visible in the doorway behind her. No context. No explanation. No proof of innocence except the kind nobody ever believed once a story had already become entertaining. The image was captured from the corridor camera feed, security said. Then copied from an internal review terminal. Meaning someone on staff stole it, Adrian said. There was no increase in volume. Somehow that made the room colder. We're tracing access. The communications director pushed a legal pad toward Lena. The question is whether this remains a theft issue or becomes a conduct issue. Lena looked at the woman, then at the photo again. Conduct issue. That was how corporations turned humiliation into paperwork. There was no misconduct, she said evenly. I entered the wrong suite by mistake. I fell asleep. Mr. Wolf chose not to wake me. General Counsel adjusted his glasses. Can anyone corroborate that timeline? Lena thought of Ava's texts. The timestamp on Mason's message. The black hole between sitting on the bed and opening her eyes at dawn. Not every minute of it, she said. No, Adrian's voice cut cleanly across the table. Then I do. The room shifted. The communications director hesitated. With respect, Adrian, you are not a neutral witness. I'm not attempting neutrality. I'm stating fact. Which may not be enough for the board if the story gains traction. Lena understood the warning beneath the polished language. Adrian Wolf could survive whispers. She might not. He could deny, redirect, absorb. She would be measured against standards no one would say aloud. Did she advance because she was good, or because a powerful man liked the view? The oldest lie in the room never needed proof. Only timing. What are my options? She asked. The communications director inhaled carefully. If we treat this as a privacy breach and suppress distribution, we may contain it. But if it spreads first, the cleanest immediate move would be to reassign you off the Bristol Harbor deal until the weekend closes. There it was. Not a punishment, they would say. A precaution. Always the language of reasonable damage. Lena felt heat rise behind her eyes and hated it on sight. Before she could answer, Adrian said, "No." General Counsel looked at him. "Adrian, no," he repeated. "You do not remove my lead analyst from a transaction she built because someone committed theft and hoped gossip would do the rest." "Perception matters," Counsel said. "Not more than truth." "To boards?" the communications director asked. "Frequently." Adrian turned to Lena. "Step outside with me." It was not a request, but neither was it an order she resented. In the corridor, the door closed behind them with a hush that felt indecently calm compared to the storm on the other side. Lena stared at the carpet for 1 second, then another, because if she looked at him too quickly she might mistake anger for safety and collapse into both. "You cannot fix this by force," she said. "Watch me try." "That's not funny." "It wasn't meant to be." Adrian stood in front of her, close enough that the sharp scent of his cologne cut through the metallic taste of stress. "Tell me the truth," he said. "Are you afraid of the story or the consequence?" She let out a breath that fractured on the way out. "Both." He nodded once, as though fear stated plainly was a form of usable data. "Good." Lena blinked. "Good. It means you understand the stakes. Not that you should surrender to them." She looked away toward the long corridor of polished doors and hidden cameras and suddenly resented the whole polished machine of the hotel. Every corridor promised privacy. Every corridor watched. "They'll say I used you," she said. "Or you used me. Or both. They'll say I got onto Bristol because I was sleeping with the CEO." Adrian's face hardened. "And what do you say?" "I say I did the work." "Then stand there." "That's easy for you to say when your career isn't the one hanging by a thread." He went still. "You think mine isn't?" Lena frowned. Adrian never looked openly angry. Now he did not look angry either. He looked something worse, offended down to the bone. "If the board believes I compromised governance, they will use it," he said. "Not because they care what happened in that suite, but because power invites challengers. Do not mistake difference in type for difference in risk." She had not considered that. Or she had, vaguely, but not like this. Not as a blade pointed at him from another direction. "Then maybe they should reassign me," she said quietly. Contain the story. Protect the deal. Adrian took one step closer. Lena. What? If you ask me for distance because you want it, I will give it to you. His voice lowered. If you ask me for distance because cowards might benefit from it, I won't. The truth of him stood there, infuriating and impossible. Not tenderness. Not exactly. Something fiercer. More disciplined. A refusal to make her smaller so other people could feel clean. The door behind them opened. General Counsel stepped out, expression cautious. We may have identified the source, he said. A junior analyst in Celeste Warren's reporting chain downloaded the footage. There are also messages linking him to Mason Cole. Lena shut her eyes briefly. Of course. Of course it had roots in both directions. Ambition and resentment made efficient business partners. Adrian's voice turned glacial. Keep the board waiting, he said. I'll handle the rest. Adrian, Counsel warned, be careful. Adrian looked at Lena, not Counsel. No, he said. I'm done being careful. By 10 that night the Halcyon Grand was holding its breath. News traveled fast in corporate environments because people with money rarely shouted, they preferred to leak. A photo. A rumor. A suggestion that Adrian Wolf's newest star analyst had spent the night in his suite before being elevated onto the weekend's most important deal. Staff whispered in elevators. Investors pretended not to have heard. Phones lit up in dark corners like accomplices. And somewhere near the center of the storm, Lena sat alone for exactly 4 minutes in the silent edge of the hotel library before deciding she was done hiding from narratives built by lesser people. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and walked straight to the executive floor. Adrian was in the private strategy room with 3 board members, general counsel, and the kind of tension that made the air feel sharpened. He looked up the moment she entered. Whatever he saw in her face made him stop speaking. One board member, a silver-haired man named Kenner who had never met a woman he could not politely underestimate, frowned. Ms. Hart, this is not the time. I disagree, Lena said. It is exactly the time. She crossed the room before anyone could object and placed a folder on the table. These are the Bristol Harbor forecasts, the version history, my original modeling notes, and the communication chain proving I built the acquisition framework over the last 7 weeks. She looked from one face to another. If anyone in this room intends to suggest I obtained my position through personal access rather than work product, I'd like them to do it while those documents are open. Silence answered her. Good. She had spent too much of her life being strategically likable. Anger, it turned out, had a cleaner spine. Kenner shifted back in his chair. No one is making accusations. You are discussing reassignment, Lena said. That is accusation with legal formatting. Adrian's mouth moved almost imperceptibly, not quite a smile, not quite surprise. Another board member, Elena Vasquez, folded her hands. The issue is governance exposure. Then address governance exposure, Lena replied. Investigate the theft. Remove the people who weaponized private surveillance footage. Do not tell me that the cleanest solution to male misconduct is female displacement. The sentence landed. She saw it. Good again. She had stopped caring about comfort somewhere between the library and the elevator. Kenner cleared his throat. The optics, Adrian cut in, have already changed. He tapped his phone once and turned the screen toward the board. On it was a message thread between Mason and the junior analyst from Celeste's team, discussing the corridor footage, distribution timing, and a line that made Lena's stomach turn cold. She'll be off Bristol by morning if Wolf values the deal more than the girl. The room froze. General Counsel spoke first. Where did you get this? Security and digital forensics, Adrian said. There's more. He slid additional pages across the table, access logs, payment transfers, and a second set of messages from Celeste instructing the analyst to surface anything useful if Lena continued overstepping. Celeste had not explicitly ordered the leak, but proximity to poison was poison enough. Ms. Warren has been placed under immediate review, Adrian said. Mr. Cole has been notified that Davenport's involvement in Bristol is suspended pending internal consultation. Kenner stared at the documents. You're risking the acquisition. Adrian's voice turned almost mild. No. I'm removing liabilities. Lena watched the board recalibrate in real time. That was the thing about power. People called it principle when it stood strong enough to survive them. Adrian looked at her then, and something passed between them too private for the room. Permission. Solidarity. Possibly trouble. I'd like the minutes to reflect, Lena said, that I object to any reassignment based on rumor. Elena Vasquez gave the slightest nod. Noted. Kenner bristled. This is irregular. So is weaponized surveillance footage, Elena replied coolly. We can rank irregularities later. Adrian closed the folder in front of him. Bristol Harbor proceeds as planned. Ms. Hart remains on lead analysis. Celeste Warren is suspended pending investigation. Security will brief human resources before midnight. Any further attempt to circulate private footage from this property results in termination and civil action. He stood. Meeting over. Empire intact. The board members rose more slowly, gathering their papers and pride in unequal portions. Within minutes only Lena and Adrian remained in the room. For a moment neither moved. Then Lena let out a breath she felt she had been holding since sunrise. You didn't have to burn half your weekend to keep me on one deal, she said. Adrian stepped toward her. This was never about one deal. No. No, the exhaustion of the day showed in him now, barely, at the edges, a tension in his shoulders, a darker shadow beneath the eyes, the cost of relentless control. Come here, he said quietly. Lena laughed under her breath. That is a dangerous sentence from you. Most accurate things are. She crossed the space between them because pretending caution still existed felt insulting to both of them. Adrian touched her face as if confirming she was real and unbroken. You were magnificent in there, he said. Praise from him was rare. Personal praise rarer still. It landed lower than her heartbeat. I was furious, she said. Yes, he replied. You wear it very well. She should have said something clever. Instead the truth came out. I was scared. His thumb brushed her cheek once. I know. And you still put me back in the room. Adrian's expression sharpened with something that looked almost like pride. Where else would you belong? That was the moment Lena stopped wondering whether this was a bad idea. It absolutely was. Catastrophically. Professionally. Possibly emotionally. But there are moments when the wrong thing aligns so exactly with the deepest truth of you that refusing it becomes the real betrayal. She rose on her toes and kissed him first this time. Adrian made a rough sound low in his throat and answered with all the restraint he had left, which was not much and not nearly enough. When they broke apart, forehead to forehead again, he said, you should know something before this goes any further. That sounds ominous. Probably. His eyes held hers. I have wanted you since the first week you argued with me about the Vienna portfolio and refused to apologize after winning. Lena stared. That was 11 months ago. I'm aware. You are a deeply unwell man. Likewise. And for the first time all weekend, laughing felt like victory. She put her hand over his where it rested against her skin. Don't stop. Something changed in Adrian's face then, not surprise exactly, but the end of a restraint so old it had become habit. He kissed her in the quiet kitchen while rain threaded silver across the windows and the building around them settled into after-hours silence. There was no corridor emergency to interrupt them this time, no gala noise, no threat waiting at the edge of the moment. Only the clean, dangerous fact of choice. Lena kissed him back with the full force of a woman who had spent years earning her place and had finally found a man who did not ask her to shrink in order to keep it. His hands framed her waist, steady and warm, as if even now he was giving her the space to step back. She didn't. She moved closer until the marble island pressed lightly against her hips and Adrian made that same rough sound she was beginning to think of as a private form of honesty. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers and exhaled once. "There are rules," he said. "There are always rules with you." "Yes." She smiled. "I was hoping for one reckless sentence." His mouth brushed hers again, brief and devastating. "I can give you those too." What followed was not easy, which was perhaps why it lasted. They did not tumble into some secret fantasy where rank and optics vanished on command. They had meetings with counsel. Disclosures to make. Boundaries to formalize. Adrian recused himself from any direct performance review involving Lena and shifted oversight of her compensation to Elena Vasquez and finance. Lena signed documents she barely had the energy to resent. They agreed that if this became real, it would become real in daylight, not in corners. It was the most Adrian Wolf arrangement imaginable, desire, but audited. And yet beneath all the structure, something startlingly tender began to grow. He learned that she hated lilies because they reminded her of apology bouquets sent too late. She learned that he slept badly unless rain hit the windows, which explained why he always chose hotel suites on higher floors. He discovered she counted silently when anxious, by threes, never fives. She discovered he kept every handwritten note from major deals in a locked drawer because ink, unlike email, felt accountable. He started walking her to her car after late nights without pretending it was accidental. She began leaving clementines on his desk because he skipped fruit and then claimed exhaustion like it was weather. Some evenings they worked until the offices emptied and shared takeout over marked-up contracts, their knees touching beneath conference tables built for colder things. On those nights Lena would look at him and feel the same astonishment every time, that a man could be this controlled and still love with such precise attention. Bristol Harbor closed 6 weeks later. The board approved the final acquisition package by a margin larger than Kenner found comfortable. Elena toasted Lena in the executive conference room with contraband champagne poured into coffee mugs. General counsel pretended not to see it. Adrian congratulated her in front of everyone with a handshake so formal it would have fooled strangers and absolutely no one who knew them well. By then, enough people did. The rumor cycle had not vanished, but it had starved. Facts were less entertaining than scandal, yet they had one advantage: they held. Celeste resigned before the investigation formally concluded. Mason sent one final email asking whether Lena ever thought about forgiveness. She archived it without opening the attachment and never replied. In June, Adrian asked her to dinner outside the city, not as a workaround, not as a secret, but plainly. She arrived at a quiet inn on the Hudson expecting caution and found candlelight, a private terrace, and Adrian looking almost uncertain for the first time in his adult life. "This seems elaborate," she said, taking in the river, the linen, the faint gold of sunset on water. "I was advised to attempt romance without a legal memo." "By whom?" "Elena." Threateningly. Lena laughed and sat down. Halfway through dessert, Adrian reached into his jacket and set a keycard on the table between them. She stared at it. "That had better not be a hotel room." "It is," he said. "But not for the reason you think." Reassuring already. His eyes held hers. "It's the suite at the Halcyon where you fell asleep by mistake." Lena blinked. "You booked the room where my life derailed." "Rearranged," he corrected. "That is an alarmingly optimistic word." "Perhaps." He glanced once at the card, then back to her face. "I wanted to replace the memory." Her chest tightened, sudden and full. "With what?" Adrian stood, came around the table, and knelt beside her chair in full view of the river and the setting sun and whatever gods govern timing. Lena's breath vanished. Preferably, he said, voice steadier than hers could ever have been in that moment, with the start of the rest of your life. He opened the ring box. For one wild second she could only stare. The diamond was elegant, not flashy, set in platinum with the same clean precision that marked everything he chose carefully. But it was not the ring that undid her. It was Adrian, on one knee, looking at her with all the composure of a man who had built empires and none of the certainty of someone prepared for this answer. I know the timing is imperfect, he said. I know you value your work, your independence, and the life you built before me. I am not asking you to surrender any of it. I am asking whether you'll let me build beside you for as long as I live. Tears burned hot and immediate. Lena laughed through them because there was nothing else to do with that much feeling except tell the truth badly. You planned that speech. For 3 weeks. It's disgustingly effective. I had hoped. She touched his face with shaking fingers. Yes, she whispered. Then, because Adrian deserved clarity in all things, she said it again. Yes. He exhaled like a man reprieved. When he slid the ring onto her hand, his own fingers trembled once. Only once. Lena noticed, loved him for it, and kissed him before he could recover enough to hide the evidence. They married in October under a canopy of late autumn leaves at a stone estate hotel Adrian had nearly bought once and walked away from because, as he later admitted, it didn't feel like a place where joy would last. With her there, it did. Ava cried through the vows. Elena approved of the wine. Kenner attended and spent the entire reception discovering that Lena, now beyond his ability to sideline, was even more dangerous as family to the CEO. Adrian danced with her twice before dinner and once after midnight when most of the guests had drifted toward fireplaces and brandy. You realize, Lena murmured against his shoulder, this is all because I was bad at room numbers. No, Adrian said, hand warm at her back. It's because you were brave enough to walk into the wrong future and stay long enough to find the right one. 2 years later, on a rain-soaked Thursday evening, Lena came home to their apartment overlooking the river with one sleeping toddler on her shoulder, another child on the way, and exhaustion braided so tightly into her bones it almost counted as personality. Adrian took their son from her the moment she stepped through the door, kissed Lena once, then looked at her more closely. You missed lunch, he said. Don't start. I'm not starting. I'm observing. You're impossible. And yet you continue to reward me. She laughed, kicked off her shoes, and followed him into the kitchen where soup simmered, bread warmed in the oven, and rain touched the windows with a sound that always made the apartment feel gathered and safe. Their son stirred sleepily against Adrian's shoulder, one small hand clutching the knot of his father's tie. Lena leaned against the counter and looked at the scene before her, the feared executive, the disciplined strategist, the man once described by an entire industry as impenetrable, now swaying gently beside the stove with a child in his arms and tenderness written everywhere he no longer bothered to hide. Adrian glanced at her. What? Nothing, she said softly. I'm just thinking how strange life is. His mouth curved. Because? She crossed the room, took the spoon from his hand, tasted the soup, and set it back down. Because once upon a time I snuck into the wrong hotel room to hide from my ex. She slid her free hand into his, ring cool against ring. And somehow that was the smartest mistake I ever made. This time when he kissed her, it was slow, familiar, and certain, with rain at the windows and home all around them.